The morning everything unraveled began with a single sentence that broke me. My wife stared at me with eyes I could barely recognize anymore and said, "You're worthless. I'm taking the kids." Those words struck deeper than losing my job earlier that day. I had walked into the factory I'd worked at for almost 10 years, only to be told my position was eliminated. No heads up, no appreciation, just a cardboard box and a handshake that felt more like an erasure of my worth. By the time Marielle hurled her words at me, I already felt empty. But when she said she was taking Nolan and Tessa, it felt like she tore away the last remnants of my world. I stood there in shock, clutching the old lunch bag my mother Leona had sewn for me long ago, the same one I brought with me to work every day. My children's laughter, their fridge drawings, the bedtime stories. I saw all of it slipping away in an instant. I couldn't breathe inside that house anymore. I stepped outside without a clue where to head. The crisp September air slapped my face like a reminder that everything was gone. My thoughts spun wildly, whispering that she was right, that I had failed not just her, but Nolan and Tessa as well. I wandered aimlessly for what felt like hours before I found myself in front of a place I had never seen before, a small diner glowing with warm yellow light in the night. I pushed the door open and sank into a booth at the edge of the room, staring blankly at a steaming mug of coffee placed in front of me by a quiet waitress. My reflection in the dark surface looked unfamiliar, tired, shattered, lost. I was so absorbed in my own sorrow that I didn't notice the old man sitting beside me until he spoke. "You look just like my son," he said in a slow, steady voice. I turned my head, puzzled. His aged face bore the lines of countless stories, but his eyes carried a sorrow I couldn't ignore, and he added, "But he's been gone for 35 years. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of his words. Before I could speak, he leaned closer, watching me like he feared I might disappear. Then came 5 simple words that would alter my life forever. "I grew up in a home where working with your hands, keeping promises, and moving with quiet dignity were core values. My father, Gareth, was a mechanic who could bring life back to anything with an engine. He wasn't a talker, but when he did speak, his words stuck. A man is judged by how he stands when everything crumbles," he once told me during my teenage frustration over a busted truck. I dismissed it then, but years later, that wisdom echoed louder than ever. My mother, Leona, was his balance, gentle yet firm. Her kindness had strength behind it. She believed in giving people second chances, in helping them feel seen. She was the one who sat with me during long nights of homework, teaching me that patience outweighed quick wins. I carried her lessons with me into adult life, even though over time they started to feel distant. I was never the athlete, never the standout, never the man others pointed to with admiration. But I worked hard. I showed up to the factory early, even when my back hurt and my hands bled from steel. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. For years, I thought that was enough to prove my value. Then I met Marielle. She was fierce, clever, and bolder than anyone I had ever known. Where I hesitated, she charged ahead. Early in our marriage, she once told me, "You make me feel safe, Ethan, like the ground won't shift beneath me." I clung to those words for years. We built a life. When Nolan came along, and then Tessa 3 years later, I believed we had found our rhythm. But over time, Marielle's words changed. She no longer said I made her feel safe. She said I made her feel trapped. My steadiness became stagnation in her eyes. "You never want more, Ethan," she'd argued during our money fights. "You're content to stay at the bottom while others rise." And maybe she was right. I had once dreamed bigger, but I buried those dreams under layers of duty. Every morning, I clocked in. Every night, I tried to be the man my family needed. I thought it was enough. It wasn't for her. The kids, though, they never looked at me with judgment. Nolan, just 10, had Marielle's intellect, but my calmness. He asked endless questions, from engines to emotions. Tessa, just 7, lived with a radiant joy. She loved drawing animals, taping them on the fridge for me. They made the heaviness bearable. They gave my life meaning when the rest of it felt like too much. Then there was my brother, Colin, a louder voice I couldn't ignore. Younger, bolder, always chasing more. One night over beers, he told me, "You've got to fight for yourself, Ethan. Life keeps running you over because you let it." I laughed then, but his words stayed buried inside me. When I lost the factory job, it felt like losing a limb. I had walked through those metal doors almost daily for 10 years. I knew the floors, the machines, the rhythm. Losing that job wasn't just about income. It erased a piece of my identity. On the drive home, the box sat on the passenger seat. I stared at my reflection in the window, thoughts crashing. How would I tell Marielle? What would she say? When I walked in, she was waiting. Her eyes moved from me to the box. "They let you go, didn't they?" she asked. No shock in her voice, just resignation. I nodded. "Cutbacks," I said. "Nothing I could do." She crossed her arms. "Nothing you could do. That's always your excuse." I tried to explain, to promise I'd find something else, that it wasn't the end. But she cut me off. "You're worthless. I'm taking Nolan and Tessa." In that instant, it was like the walls of our house collapsed inward. I wanted to fight back, to argue, to beg. I looked around at the family photos, the crayon art, and felt something inside me shatter. Marielle turned, packed a bag, and told the kids they were going to her sister's. Nolan looked back at me, his face confused. "Dad, aren't you coming?" he asked. My throat clenched as I forced a smile. "Not tonight, buddy. I'll see you soon." I stood in the doorway and listened to the car pull away, slicing through the silence. Alone, I stepped into the kitchen and set the factory box on the table. Inside were fragments of my past, an old thermos, my gloves, and a sketch Nolan made of us holding hands. My chest tightened, a physical ache pressing down. That was the state I was in when I walked outside, leaving everything I had ever known behind. My legs moved on their own, each step heavier than the last, until the neon diner sign came into view. The diner was small, wedged between a gas station and a pawn shop, the kind of place most people overlooked. Its soft yellow lights buzzed faintly, casting a nostalgic glow. I stepped through the door, and the warmth inside felt like something I no longer deserved. The air smelled of overcooked bacon and burnt coffee, like the rushed breakfasts of my working years. I slipped into a booth at the back, far from the few scattered patrons. A tired-eyed waitress placed a coffee in front of me. I nodded, whispered thanks, and stared into the cup. The reflection looking back at me seemed older than I remembered, worn down by loss. My fingers trembled around the mug, though I never took a sip. The thoughts in my head were louder than the overhead hum. Marielle's voice replayed on loop. "You're worthless. I'm taking the kids." I kept trying to believe she didn't mean it, that she had just lashed out. But deep down, I knew she had been heading toward this moment for years. Every disagreement over finances. Every weary sigh when I came home late. Every moment I mistook silence for comfort. It had all been leading here. I buried my face in my hands, desperate to drown out the chaos in my head. That was when I heard the scrape of a chair across the floor. Someone had slipped into the booth opposite mine. I looked up slowly and saw an older man watching me with a gaze so intense it made my breath catch. His face was weathered, lined with years, his tan skin marked by experience. His gray hair was carefully combed, and though his clothes were worn, they were tidy, like someone who had lived a long, difficult life. "You look just like my son," he said. His voice was steady, intentional, the kind of tone that made you listen. I blinked and shook my head, unsure. "You've got the wrong guy." He kept studying me, like I was a photograph he was trying to remember. "No, you have his eyes. The way your jaw clenches when you're trying to hold in pain. My boy vanished 35 years ago. I've been searching ever since. And then I saw you here tonight." For just a second, I wondered. He trailed off, pressing his lips into a thin, quiet line. I leaned back, unsettled. "I'm really sorry about your son, but I'm not him." The old man nodded slightly, but stayed seated. "Maybe not. But you've got that same look in your eyes, like you're carrying something you can't put down." His words struck something in me, not because they were accusatory, but because they rang too true. I thought about asking him to leave, but I couldn't. There was something in his presence that calmed me, something old and familiar, like a grief he wore like a second skin. "Harlan," he said, extending a hand. I hesitated before taking it. His handshake was solid, warm, grounding. "Ethan," I replied, almost in a whisper. He nodded slowly, like he was connecting something only he could see. "You've lost something," he said. "I can see it in your posture." I gave a bitter laugh. "Lost everything, actually. My job, my wife, and my kids, all in one day." My throat tightened. She took them with her. Harlan didn't react, didn't flinch. His eyes stayed on mine, calm and unwavering. I know that feeling. Different story, same ache. That sense that maybe the world's been right about you all along, that you never really mattered, that you could vanish and no one would notice. The truth in his voice pierced straight through me. He was saying aloud the thoughts I hadn't dared acknowledge. My fists curled on the table. I don't know what to do anymore. 10 years at that job, and they cut me like it meant nothing. I built a family, and she says I ruined it. And my kids, my voice cracked. They looked so confused when she took them. I had no words for them. Harlan leaned closer, his eyes steady and sure. This can't be the end of your story. I frowned. What choice do I have? He took a slow breath. You have the choice to rise, to resist the idea that their judgment defines your worth. I didn't stop looking for my boy just because time kept passing. I didn't accept silence as closure. Because if I did, his story would have ended in disappearance, and mine in regret. But hope was all I had, so I clung to it. And that hope, Ethan, it kept me alive. Around us, the sounds of the diner, the clatter of dishes, the drone of voices, seemed to dim beneath the weight of his presence. For the first time since Marielle's words broke my world, I felt something shift inside me. Not a fire, not even a spark, but a breath. A whisper that maybe I hadn't been entirely erased. I stared at Harlan, wondering why he cared, why he had chosen to speak to me, a stranger, with such conviction. And then I understood. He had seen the same hollow in my eyes that he'd lived with for years, and he wasn't about to let me drown in it. That was when he leaned in, voice steady, eyes unflinching, and delivered the 5 words that turned everything. Harlan placed both hands on the table, his fingers spread across the faded laminate. His gaze didn't drop. With a low, certain voice that sliced clean through my spiraling thoughts, he said, "Don't abandon them like me." My heart clenched. Those 5 words hit harder than Marielle's, harder than the box of my things, harder than the sound of my kids leaving. I couldn't breathe. It felt like he had excavated the very thoughts I had tried to bury, dragging them into the light. "What do you mean?" I asked, afraid of the truth I sensed was coming. Harlan didn't look away. When my son disappeared, I had to face everything I hadn't done. I worked too much. I told myself I was doing it for him, but I was avoiding everything. I was harsh, quick to anger. I thought showing love meant keeping order. I thought my presence in the house was enough. But then he left. No goodbye, no note. And I spent decades wondering, did he leave because I made him feel invisible? Because I wasn't really there? His confession dropped into me like stones into water, each word stirring painful echoes. I remembered Nolan's eyes, wide and questioning. I saw Tessa's tiny fingers gripping her backpack. I remembered telling myself I had nothing left to give. But maybe I did. Maybe giving up now would be the thing they remembered. Not the factory, not Marielle, but this choice. I pressed my palms against the table. I don't want to be that kind of father. I don't want them thinking I stopped trying. Harlan nodded. His voice softened, but it didn't lose its edge. Then don't. You can lose a job. You can lose a marriage. But you can't lose who you are, unless you hand yourself away. And you haven't done that yet. I swallowed hard, my throat aching. But what if she doesn't let me see them? What if she shuts me out? His jaw tensed, and for the first time, his voice carried steel. Then you fight. Not with rage, not with ego, but with the love you have for those kids. You show up. You stay. You make sure they never have to wonder where you went. You don't vanish into your pain. You don't disappear into silence. You don't leave them holding the question I've carried for 35 years. His conviction hit me like a wave. I sat frozen, looking at this stranger who had appeared in my darkest hour, speaking not as a man full of advice, but as one full of words. For the first time that day, I felt something ignite inside me, a flame that burned brighter than the shame and darker thoughts I'd been dragging like chains. It was faint, trembling, but it was real. I leaned back against the booth, my fists curling, breath slowly evening out. I'm not leaving this like it is. I'm going to see my children. I'm going to speak the truth. I won't let the last thing they remember about me be my silence. Harlan's eyes gentled, and for a second, there was something proud in them. There. That's the man they need. Not flawless, not invincible, but still standing. I nodded, his words settling in my chest like something I'd needed to carry all along. "Thank you," I said, my voice cracking despite me. "I don't know what made you sit across from me tonight, but I needed this more than you could know." A faint smile touched the edge of his lips. Maybe I didn't choose. Maybe it was just supposed to happen. The waitress came by, refilled our mugs with a tired nod, and I realized mine was still untouched. Harlan took a slow sip, setting the cup down with a quiet click. You know what to do? Don't wait. Don't let fear speak for you. Go now. I stared down at the coffee, then at my hands, scarred, worn, familiar. Not the hands of a man Marielle admired anymore, but maybe still the hands of a father who refuses to vanish. I stood. My chair screeched lightly against the floor. I'm going, I said, mostly to myself. Harlan reached across the table, placing a firm hand on my arm. His grip surprised me, strong and certain for a man his age. Remember what I said. Don't abandon them like I did. I nodded. Those words, branded now, burned into my spine. I turned and walked toward the door, my chest aching with a strange, pulsing resolve. I pushed into the cold night air. The breeze bit at my face, but it cleared the grease and coffee from my lungs. For the first time in hours, my steps felt like they meant something. As I crossed the lot, I glanced back. Through the window, I saw Harlan still watching me. He lifted his cup slightly in a quiet farewell. I raised my hand in return, then slipped into my car. I knew where she'd gone. Marielle always ran to her sisters when she needed backup. That's where Nolan and Tessa would be. My fingers clenched the steering wheel as I started the engine. For once, I wasn't focused on everything I had lost. I was focused on what I wasn't ready to lose. I drove with purpose, Harlan's voice echoing. Don't abandon them like me. I said it again and again, letting the repetition become my compass. The drive wasn't long, but it felt like crossing a continent. Every corner brought more weight, but not enough to turn me around. When I pulled into the driveway, the house lights were glowing. I saw shadows behind curtains and imagined my children wondering why I hadn't come. The thought ripped through me. I stepped out of the car and made my way to the door. My hands shook slightly, but I steadied them. I knocked. Marielle opened it. Her hair was tied back, arms crossed, her face set in a line that looked ready to cut. What are you doing here? She asked, sharp as a knife. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I came for Nolan and Tessa. I'm not leaving until I see them. Her jaw clenched. It's not the time, Ethan. They're already upset. Let this go. Something inside me shifted. The old version of me might have stepped back, might have apologized, but not now. No, I said, steady and clear. You can leave me. That's your right. But you're not cutting me out of their lives. They need me. I need them. And I'm done disappearing. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't speak. That silence gave me a thread of courage. Do you remember when we first held Nolan? My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. You told me I made you feel safe, that nothing could shake us. I've made mistakes. I know that, but I've never stopped loving them. I won't let them grow up thinking I didn't fight to stay. From behind her, a voice broke through the tension. Dad. Nolan's small frame appeared in the hallway, his eyes wide, unsure. He took a step toward me, and just like that, something in me cracked wide open. Nolan, I breathed. He ran forward before Marielle could stop him, his arms wrapping around me like he'd been waiting all night. His hug was fierce, desperate, full of all the words he didn't know how to say. I knew you'd come, he whispered. Then Tessa appeared, smaller but just as fast, wrapping herself around my leg. Daddy, are you staying? Her voice broke something deeper. I knelt down, my arms shaking as I pulled them both close. I'm here, I whispered into their hair. I'm not going anywhere. Marielle stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Her arms still crossed, but her eyes weren't so sharp now. She hadn't expected this version of me. She'd expected the broken one. Instead, she saw someone standing. You think this changes anything? She asked, softer now. It changes everything, I replied, because I finally remember who I am. I may not have a job. I may not have been the husband you needed, but I'm still their father, and I will not vanish. Nolan looked up at me, his expression firm. We need you, Dad. That sentence nearly undid me. The shame, the doubt, the voices telling me I had failed, they began to slip away beneath the weight of his certainty. Behind Marielle, her sister appeared, her brows drawn with quiet concern. Maybe let him talk to the kids, she said gently. They deserve that. Marielle looked back at her, then at me. We stood there for what felt like forever. Then, finally, she stepped aside. Fine, you can talk to them, but don't think this changes where I stand. I stood, my hands still resting on Nolan and Tessa. You don't have to decide anything tonight. Just know I'm not stepping back. Not again. Inside, we moved to the living room. Nolan curled against me. Tessa climbed into my lap. They held on to me like they thought I might vanish again. I kept my arms around them and told them what I could. That people make mistakes. That jobs are lost. That grown-ups don't always get it right. But that love doesn't break when things go wrong. Across the room, I saw something shift in Marielle's eyes. Not forgiveness, not change, but something like respect. A glimmer. The night went on, filled with soft voices and little hands holding onto mine. I didn't want to leave, but when I finally stood to go, Nolan grabbed my arm. "You'll come back tomorrow?" I crouched, looking him in the eye. "Tomorrow. And the day after. And every day I'm allowed. I'm not going anywhere." Tessa clung to me. "Promise." I kissed her forehead. "Promise." I stepped back out into the night air. It was still cool, still dark, but something inside me felt lighter. My problems hadn't disappeared. My marriage was still on the edge. My job was still gone. My life still uncertain. But for once, I wasn't defined by loss. I had something stronger now. The love of my children and the choice to fight for them. I walked back to my car, Nolan's words echoing louder than the night around me. "We need you, Dad." For simple words, but they carried more weight than any pink slip I'd received, more strength than all of Marielle's bitterness combined. Beneath them, I could still hear Harlan's voice, steady, firm, unforgettable. "Don't abandon them like me." My hands tightened around the steering wheel as I started the engine. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I knew exactly who I was and where I was going. The morning after I faced Marielle and saw the kids, I woke up with something heavy in my chest. But it wasn't despair this time. It was the weight of a promise I'd made, a sacred, quiet vow to Nolan and Tessa that I would not walk away. No matter how broken I felt, I would not disappear. The days that followed weren't easy. Marielle remained distant, cold. She reminded me, often, that our marriage had changed, that she was tired of dragging along a man who never reached higher than survival. But even through her anger, she couldn't ignore something had shifted. I didn't argue. I didn't vanish into silence. I stood firm, calm, and clear, and every time I looked at my children, I remembered why. I picked up work where I could, stocking shelves, running deliveries, repairing engines in neighbors' garages. Nothing fancy, nothing people brag about, but it kept me moving, kept me honest, gave me something to build on. Eventually, doors cracked open. My father, Gareth, brought over tools from his old shop. "Time to use your hands for something that's yours," he said. My brother, son, came by one afternoon and shook his head. "Whatever happened to you?" he said. "You finally look like you're awake." But more than anything, it was my kids who saw the change. Nolan started pulling me into school projects, his voice bright with excitement I hadn't heard in months. Tessa drew pictures of the three of us holding hands, taping them proudly to the fridge every time I came by. They weren't listening to my words. They were watching my choices. And every day I showed up, I proved to them I was still their dad, still standing. Weeks later, I returned to Daryl's diner. I wanted to thank Harlan, to tell him how his 5 words had rewired the course of my life. I stepped inside, scanned the booths, expecting him to be there, coffee in hand, same serious expression. But he wasn't. The same waitress from that night came by, and I asked if she'd seen him. "Harlan?" she asked, frowning. "You mean Harlan Venu?" I nodded quickly. "Yeah, older guy, gray hair, strong posture. Spoke like he'd been through hell, but came out wiser." Her face changed, confused, almost apologetic. I knew Harlan. He was a regular for years. Sat in that corner booth most nights. She paused. "But he passed at least 10 years ago. Maybe longer." The cup in my hand trembled slightly. I looked around the diner, half expecting to see him sitting there anyway, waiting for me with that steady look. But the booths were empty. The clink of plates and the low hum of conversation carried on as if nothing unusual had ever happened. I walked over to that same booth, sat down slowly, ran my hand along the smooth table where we'd sat, where he'd changed my life with a handful of words. I didn't know what to believe, whether Harlan had been flesh and blood or something else altogether. But I knew what mattered. His presence was real to me. His voice had reached me when nothing else could. His warning had pulled me back from the edge. I sat there quietly, whispered a soft thank you to the air, hoping somehow it would find him. Then I stood and left the diner, carrying his words like a compass in my chest. Looking back now, I understand the gift he gave me. Life will strip you bare. Jobs will vanish. Marriages may break. People you once trusted can hurt you in ways you didn't think possible. But none of that means you give up on those who still need you. A father's worth isn't measured by a paycheck. It's not written in the success of a career or the survival of a marriage. It's found in the quiet moments, when everything else has fallen apart, and he still shows up. I'm still rebuilding, still learning how to stay upright when the ground shifts under me. But I know now I am not useless. I am not broken beyond repair. I am a father, and that alone is enough to keep me standing.